Whatever happened to them all after the brouhaha was over? The villains, their families, the witnesses, even the police, and particularly the ones who were never caught. Whatever happened to the people who collected the reward money? Whatever happened to the men who went in blanket hoods to court and in handcuffs to prison? Whatever happened to the money that was stolen? £2,631,084, most of it still missing. Man alive didn't find the money, but we did find the answer to some of the other questions. For 2 years now, people have been obsessed with the robbers and their haul. Rarely has a crime and the men who committed it become the object of such open, if sometimes grudging, public admiration. Rarely has a robbery, even such a large and daring one, gathered such trappings of glamour and prestige. Even the public house in the City of London, where Douglas Gordon Goody stayed a few nights before his arrest, has become a scheduled stop for the visitor on guided bus tours. The landlord who knew Goody is now himself serving a prison sentence for receiving stolen silverware. His wife and children live on national assistance in a ground floor flat in South London. But the glamour lingers on.
Now you can put the soul ticket on this vehicle. It obviously is of historic interest. It is the only one, to our knowledge, that we've ever sold that has carried £2.5 million. We, of course, looked through very carefully. There's not very much of it left. Start me at £1,000, someone. £1,100.
At £1,550, this lorry fetched 30 times the market price because it was used in the robbery. 3 other vehicles used by the robbers were sold at the same auction. One of them, a Land Rover, second-hand value £50, went for £680. Many people still seem to want to remember the Great Train robbery, to have personal association with it. They need to be entertained with stories about it. Ex-Detective Superintendent Malcolm Futrell, who at one time led the police search, is prepared to do just this. And 150 businessmen are prepared to pay for an evening listening to him. Futrell, for one, does not share feelings of admiration for the crime or the men who committed it.
I don't want to get confused with sympathy for perhaps some of the people who are in prison or their families. Sympathy is one thing, but admiration is another. And I'm absolutely certain if any of you people had seen, as I saw, Mills, the driver of the train, an hour or so after this incident, and for that matter too, in the months that followed when he came to court to give evidence, I'm quite certain you would express no admiration at all for the people who inflicted those injuries on him.
Mrs. Mary Goody is on her way to Durham Jail to visit her son Gordon, serving 30 years for his part in the Great Train robbery. She's a widow aged 55 with 2 children and 2 grandchildren. With her on this visit, Mrs. Goody has taken as support one of Gordon's friends, Vic, no stranger to the inside of a prison. The prisoners' families and friends are allowed 1 visit a month, and for those whose men are in Durham Jail, it's a long trek, 11 hours to and from London. Officially, they're allowed half an hour with the prisoner. Mrs. Goody, like many of the other mothers and wives, is obsessed about the conditions under which the men have been serving their sentences in Durham. 19 hours locked up in their cells, conditions which they feel will affect their men's sanity. Today, the prison authorities have relaxed their half-hour rule. Vic and Mrs. Goody have been inside for an hour.
Okay, Vic.
Mrs. Goody, how was he?
As said as all right, he's gone. You would hardly know him, to be quite honest with you.
How is he mentally, do you think?
I wouldn't like to say, to be quite honest. I don't think it'd take long for him around the bend.
How is he living now? What are his conditions?
He hasn't
No
exercised since
exercise.
October the 24th. He hasn't been out. He hasn't seen fresh air. He looks shocking. I'm sick just to think about it.
Lou, when did you last see him, then?
3 months ago. 3 months ago. He's like a skeleton. He looks as if he's just come out.
You'd think he was in Bells. I'm not kidding you.
Disgraceful. Shocking. Shocking.
Has there been that much change in 3 months?
I'm telling you,
then?
yes. I'm telling you, I don't want to say too much about it because it's shocking.
I mean,
The state of him.
why is he refusing exercise?
Well, because of the size of
It's
the...
too
Because the
small.
yard that they should
They
have...
won't let them out
won't
in the,
let them
in
have
the
that,
big yard, and that
stipulated
is
yard.
it. They won't let them out there. There's
8 foot by 5.
I saw the trips. I saw a couple of young soldiers there now when I've been there. I
They've
think
got,
there was a war on.
Have they got fixed banners?
I've got something stuck up the top of the gun. I take it it's a
Fixed
bayonet.
bayonets,
Let's
yes.
face it.
Neither of them could have been 8. I should think they
No, I
must have
don't
just
suppose
come
they're
out
more
of
than
school.
20.
It's ridiculous, but there you are.
Do-
But anyway, I'd like to had a photo. I'd like to took a photograph and
Yes,
shown you.
that's what you want. A photo of them boys there.
3 of the train robbers are here in Durham Prison. Any day now, they'll be transferred with maximum security and hullabaloo to Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight. Here at Durham, they're not allowed to mix with the ordinary prisoners. They serve their sentences in isolation. But after recent protests in Parliament, their conditions have been eased slightly. But the security remains as rigid as ever.
We had the usual procedure of being met by an officer who then accompanied us for about 5 minutes to the end of the prison, more or less at the back of the prison, where we come to a gate.
This is the special compound.
This is the special compound, yes. We came to a door which I've never seen nothing like before, with at least eight locks on, and bolts up, down, and here, there, and everywhere. By the time
Keep still. Don't work with your head.
By the time this was open, we went into this room where Gordon was. This was
He was already there.
waiting for us,
Yeah.
yes. This very, very small room, accompanied by two or three wardens. And then we sat down. There was a table with a large divider between.
What do you mean by divider?
Well,
Well, a big, look, you see that there? Well, a higher thing than that, but right
can you
across
imagine
the
a
table.
tennis table with a
Yes,
net, but
with
this
that
was
in
a
between.
block of wood.
A block of wood like a table
That's
tennis
right,
net across
yes.
the table.
That sort of thing.
That's right.
But a block of wood.
And,
Plastic wood.
of course, then we sat down, and all this time the warder stayed there. Of course, no one said nothing for the minute, for the shock. I didn't anyway, for the shock of seeing him in the state he was in.
How does it compare with a normal sentence? A normal long-term sentence served by
Well-
a murderer, for instance?
Well, it's a joke. I mean, now, where I was, there was men like Blake doing 42 years. He was not only called by his first name, he could do what he liked, he could go where he liked. There was other men like King, the murderer, killed 4 people, killed his family and his wife's family. Could do what they like and when they like. It's a joke, really, to compare the two. There's no comparison. I mean, even me, for my sentence, I mean, I must have been like in a holiday camp compared to the way they treat me.
William Bowl comes from this street in Fulham. He's serving 14 years in Lincoln Jail. His crime is not robbing the train, but conspiracy to stop it, with intent to rob. His wife, Renee, lives on national assistance, plus what she can make as a charwoman. She sees her husband only 4 times a year, when the National Assistance Board pays her train fare to Lincoln. The house they live in belongs to William Bowl's mother, and they share it with her. During the school holidays, she has to be at home during the day to look after her 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. In his father's absence, the eldest son, David, has inherited the role of head of the house.
I get up at 5. I leave here at 5:30. And I'm back home about 8:30 to get the children to school.
And what sort of a place are you cleaning?
Big office block.
Do you do it under your own name, or...?
No, I go my single name.
Why is that?
Well, I don't think I'd get a job in my name. And I haven't got any confidence now, so I've had my insurance cards changed.
What about your mother? You said she helped a bit.
Well, she goes to work early morning. She's up at 5:30, and she's nearly 70. But she's got bronchitis, you see, and I keep telling her to pack it up. But she helps with all the fruit and clothes and all that, you see. So we're all managing together.
And how much do you get for...?
£6.50 national assistance, and I earn £3.17.
David's still at school?
He
Yes,
is.
I'm still at school.
And how long are you going to stay there?
Well, I hope to stay on until I'm 17, but the way we're going on now, I'll have to leave earlier. If money gets really desperate, which it quite probably will.
If you do manage to stay on, what do you hope to do?
Well, I haven't really thought about it too much. No, I think there's still time to think about that. It actually depends on the circumstances I'm in when I leave school.
You're not an engineer like your father, then?
Well, I wouldn't mind being an engineer, but he says that there's too much to know for much too little money. And I quite believe him.
Do you get ribbed at school or any nasty remarks passed at school?
Well, no, they're quite a nice bunch, you know, but you do get the misfits in any crowd.
When you go and see him, does he rely on you to bring him news and look after everything for him?
Well, as I'm the eldest, he expects me to look after Anthony and Deborah, of course. He puts me in charge of them to see they don't run around the streets too much. He expects me to give them some sort of tuition, the way he gave me tuition.
What did he used to give you tuition in?
Well, life in general.
And this is now your job with the other two children?
He expects me to pass his knowledge that he gave to me on to them.
How do you do this?
Well, just as life goes by, he drops into our conversations, you see.
What sort of things do you teach them that he taught you?
Well, just honesty, man.
There are no money worries in the Wisby family. Thomas Wisby, who is serving 30 years in Durham, still has an interest in a betting shop, which pays his family an allowance. And Mrs. Wisby supplements this by working there in the afternoons. She lives with her two daughters, aged 12 and 10, in a comfortably furnished council flat in Camberwell. She's worried about the publicity and the effect on her children, because they're teased at school.
At first, when my husband was first sentenced and that, they used to come home from school crying every day and saying that someone or the other had been saying about your dad's a train robber. And in the finish, I had to take them to a school out of the area where they wouldn't be noticed. And so far, like, I've had no trouble at the new school, and they're settling down quite happily.
Do you ever feel bitter about what's happening?
Oh, I feel terrible. I feel bitter with the whole world at the moment, and I think I will do, till things get better for the men, you know. Because I think, you know, the way they've been treated, well, especially my husband, I mean, let's face it, he seems as if he's had it hard out of all of them. You know, he went on the hunger strike, and that was only over conditions. I mean, so what have you got to do? I mean, you go on a hunger strike to prove your point, and he went on the hunger strike, and now they're not making things better, they're making them a darn sight worse. And I told him, don't dare go on another hunger strike, because he's as thin as a rake now. But he must have been a bit overweight, I should think, from when he first got convicted. But none the more for that. I wouldn't like to see him get any more thinner, because it doesn't suit him, you know, and it's changed his whole appearance.
You go up to see him every month, don't you?
Yes.
Did you take the children with you?
No. I took them out on Monday. That was the first visit for 6 months. But, you know, he's been looking so rough that I was afraid to take them out in case it may have alarmed them, you know. And the soldiers and that sitting around, I thought it might have upset them a bit. They never upset me, the soldiers. I never took no notice, you know. I mean, they never asked to be put there, did they? Let's face it.
How did the children take it? How did they react to the visit?
Very, very good. It was a very good visit, and I was quite pleased the way the prison authorities laid it on for me and the kids. They sat on his lap, cuddled him, and we had an hour. The visit was extended to an hour, and I thought that was very good. And the 2 police officers that were present never interrupted our visit at all, you know. But as I say, I was still at the end of a long table. I couldn't touch him. I couldn't go around and sit on his lap or cuddle him, you know. But the children were allowed to. That's another point, you know.
But not all the wives are still so closely attached to their husbands. Here in a quiet street in London lives Mrs. Charmaine Biggs, whose husband Ronald escaped dramatically from Wandsworth Prison last July. She lives comfortably enough in this middle-class block of flats. She's an attractive woman with 2 children, a number of new friends, and she now drives a Rover 2000. And she has changed her name.
How did you find out where I was? I'm so anti-depressed, I don't even feel inclined to invite you in. That's how I feel. Do you know what I mean? We've had such a rough handling. Everything I've seen on the television has been absolutely disgusting and has made the people that have been interviewed look ignorant.
Sabre is a Great Dane who lives just outside Wandsworth Prison. He worried the men who plotted Ronald Biggs' escape, an escape that took precisely 7 minutes. In planning it, the plotters tried to fix Sabre. They approached his owner, a prison warder, and tried to buy him. They were very persistent, but the dog was not for sale. But they needn't have worried. At the time of the escape, Sabre was asleep indoors. The trail of Biggs led all over London, the southern counties, and out into the world. His prison clothing was found, houses were searched, raids took place. 4 men were caught in the net and accused of conspiracy to aid his escape. And Biggs himself, 36 years old, 6 foot 1 inch high, and 3 stone overweight from his prison life. This is where he went, to a house in Upland Road, East Dulwich. Here, in this room, Biggs stayed for 3 nights. His hideout was chosen with care. The owners, a Cypriot couple, Mr. and Mrs. Marilis, cannot read, and they speak only broken English.
I've seen him only one time, at daytime. I don't see him anymore.
And what was he doing then?
I see him, and he go to toilet, and he come, you know, I see him when he's go to toilet.
The trail of Ronald Biggs went cold in the upstairs lavatory at 280 Upland Road, East Dulwich. 11 months earlier, Charlie Wilson had made his escape from Winson Green, Birmingham. It was thought to be an inside job. Duplicate keys were used. And nothing has been heard officially of Charlie Wilson since he climbed down a ladder and left a muddy footprint. And the other wanted men? Outside police stations up and down the country, tattered notices plead for information about James White and his wife Cherie, for Bruce Reynolds, the ringleader, for Buster Edwards, the leader of the Southeastern gang, and for his wife June. The police only just missed the Edwards. For a time, they lived here in Old Forge Crescent, Shepperton, on the southwest fringes of London. The next-door neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Carlyle, had several dealings with this apparently ordinary couple who called themselves Mr. and Mrs. Green.
He had some very good fishing equipment, and 1 or 2 of the neighbours took up fishing fairly strangely after this.
I thought he had an executive's job where he could come and go as he wanted, you know. Not saying much for executives, is it?
Wanted more than any of the others is Bruce Reynolds, the leader of the robbers. 5 times the police have questioned this man. Each time he's been able to prove that however much he resembles Reynolds, he is in fact Noel Botham, freelance journalist. The police have not given up hope of catching the wanted men. Here at Scotland Yard, they're absolutely confident that they will get their men sooner or later. And here in the Temple, Mrs. Peter Fordham, wife of one of the defence barristers in the trial and author of a book on the robbery, has her own views on the money that got away.
Well, no, this is one of the really funny things about it. This robbery ought to be a lesson to the underworld, because there's no doubt whatever that this money has brought unhappiness right through, almost wherever it's touched. Broken homes, unhappy children, misery, disillusionment. One of the people connected with it said to me recently that there can't be anybody connected with it who wouldn't like to put the clock back 2.5 years. The money really seems to have had a curse on it.
I wish I had never been involved in the train robbery.
You wish you'd never had the reward?
I wish I never had been involved in it, very definitely.
So far, the banks and the post office have paid out £42,000 in reward money. Mrs. Ethel Clark, the 70-year-old widow of a policeman, got £14,000 as a result of one telephone call. Mrs. Clark lives alone, and she became worried one evening in August 1963 when 2 men called at her house in Bournemouth and asked if they could rent her garage. They were insistent and offered her twice what she was asking. Later, she dialed 999. The police arrested William Bowl and Roger Cordray and recovered £141,000. Has the reward money brought Mrs. Clark happiness?
Well, I don't know. I just don't know what to do with it. Know what I'm supposed to do with it. I'm just not interested in it. That's hardly the right thing to say.
Well, your financial circumstances are obviously easier. You can buy things now that you...
Well, there will be eventually, probably, when I can get round to thinking what to do with it. In the meantime, it's in my trustee's hands, and I'm just still wondering what to do with this. I've travelled quite a lot. I don't want to travel, and there's nothing I particularly want at the moment. I was perfectly happy before this happened. I feel I'll never be happy again, quite frankly.
How did the imprisonment of the 2 men that were captured affect you?
Well, it affected me very strongly to feel that I was responsible for it. It affected me very badly, and I'm afraid it always will.
And yet they were 2 people who committed a crime.
Yes, I know. Had anyone else been responsible for their imprisonment, I wouldn't have worried, of course, but the fact that I was responsible for their unhappiness, I really do feel very strongly about that.
John Maris tipped off the police about the robbers' hideout at Leatherslade Farm. His reward, £18,000. But Maris won't talk about it. He did once to a man who said he was writing a book. The book didn't appear. Instead, Maris was arrested for perjury. The case was dismissed, but it cost Maris £3,000 to prove his innocence, and the nervous strain so affected his wife that she's been ill for 3 months and is still under treatment. Mr. John Ahern and Mrs. Elsa Hargrave haven't suffered from the £10,000 reward money which they shared. They both work for the same firm in Dorking, and every morning Mr. Ahern gives Mrs. Hargrave a lift to work. Usually they travel by car, but on a Friday in August 1963, the car was in for repair, and they travelled instead on Mr. Ahern's motorbike. Now, the bike had an odd fault. From time to time, it would stop for no apparent reason. All that Mr. Ahern knew was that if he left it for a couple of minutes, it would start again. Mrs. Hargrave, being, as she describes herself, a bit of a fidget, strolled off through the woods. And there, placed in a small depression not 100 yards from the road, were 3 cases. A 4th was found not far away. Inside was just over £100,000 in banknotes.
I had one of my friends from the city office in Hetton Garden phone through on the Monday morning to say that he really wasn't interested to know how much money was involved. He was more interested to know what I was doing in the wood with a young lady. So, I would say it has been quite fun, really. We've had a certain amount of laughs out of it. And,
I've had leg pulls as well, really, you know, nice ones.
Any nasty?
Yes, I have had some, not from my friends, naturally, but I'm more referring to general conversation of people who didn't know who I was. And you listen to what they had to say, and then you turn around and you say, oh, yes, well, I have to be the lady. Oh, that sort of thing. And that's where you hear the truth, you see.
You had to wait over a year for your money.
Yes, actually,
Yes.
from the 16th of August 1963, when we found the money, and we received our rewards on the 19th of November 1964, and it was a very, very nice cheque for $5,045 each.
Well, what have you done with your money, Mr.
Well,
Hearn?
actually, I've put mine away. I've invested it because the wife and I always had continental holidays, and she'd helped me out for quite a number of years by taking in a bit of sewing and that. And I really feel now, I've told her, that there's no need for her to do any more sewing, that the investments from the reward money will pay for our continental holidays for the rest of our life, I hope.
And what have you done with your reward?
Well, I bought myself a very nice fur coat, for one thing. I had a beaver lamb. I bought another type. I could probably have had it, as I say, in 5 years' time, maybe. But it's things like that. I mean, it's just come just that little bit earlier for me. I suppose I'm fortunate.
There's one other man who has been rewarded by the public. Malcolm Futrell, head of Buckinghamshire CID at the time of the train robbery. Now, in his retirement, he travels the country talking to luncheon clubs, dining clubs, Rotary clubs, women's institutes, earning between £10 and £25 per lecture, a useful addition to his pension.
Introduce Mr. Malcolm Futrell. Had you in fact been planning this campaign, what improvements would you yourself have made?
I've been asked a few loaded questions in my time. Well, now, you've assumed, well, a good many people assume, that there was a mastermind. Now, I've never subscribed to that theory at all.
The great train robbery still fills the front pages, still provokes admiration for audacity, sympathy for the men serving the sentences. But do we remember Jack Mills, the train driver whose bravery brought him a reward of only £526 and an injury from which he has never fully recovered? Mrs. Clark remembers.
Mr. Mills, I met him, of course. I knew him, got to know him quite well, meeting him several times and staying at the same hotel in Aylesbury. We had our meals together, and we went to court together to hear the sentences. And with just a casual conversation, he said he'd never been to Bournemouth. I said, well, when I'm settled, I'd be very happy if you'd come down and bring your wife with you. And he eventually wrote to me and said he was having his holiday in July and that he'd very much like to come. And I was very, very happy to have them. They were charming people, and it was quite a joy to me to have them here.
This was the first holiday they'd had after he'd come out of hospital?
I believe so, and I'm hoping they'll come again.